Hi, I'm Susan Shaner with Sage Leadership Strategies, and I'm your host today of Community Forum. And today I have the great pleasure to introduce to you Michael Rosenbaum, who is a Metaphysician Practitioner. Welcome, Michael.
Happy to be here.
Great to have you. Now, I want to let our audience know you have a lot of titles after your name.
God.
So Metaphysician Practitioner is one of them, but you also have Advanced Certified Hypnotist, TAT Professional, and Death and Dying Specialist. So we're going to talk a little more detail about the Metaphysician Practitioner, but can you tell us what some of these other titles mean? Maybe we start with a hypnotist.
Okay, well, I'm an advanced hypnotherapist, and what I like to do is help people find the root cause of negative patterns, negative emotions, things that kind of create havoc in their life, how to work with the inner mind to shift those patterns, because those patterns are in the inner mind, not the conscious mind. So
what's the inner mind? I'm periodically going to stop you, because especially for our audience who has no frame of reference for any of this.
Great.
Okay.
So the inner mind is the subconscious mind and the unconscious mind. And a lot of patterns and history gets recorded in the subconscious and unconscious mind, and then we're kind of on automatic pilot. So somebody says something, and all of a sudden you get upset, you get angry, or you get
Where did
sad.
that come from? Yeah.
Right. So it came from a pre-existing impression from something that happened a long time ago. And so what I do is help people either discover what that is or do an inner mind type process, subconscious, unconscious mind process to change that.
Like what would be an example of an inner mind process?
Okay, well, one of those things, TAT, the Tapas Acupressure Technique, is an inner mind.
What is it?
Tapas Acupressure Technique.
Okay.
That's what it stands for. And that's an inner mind technique where we talk to the mind and we ask it to heal an issue. So we start out what the issue is, and then there's a kind of it's based on acupressure, so you're touching a couple of different acupressure points, and then which activates the mind in a certain way to solve a problem, and then you give the mind healing statements around that problem. I do regression therapy, not necessarily past regression, but just to go back and have you see how you put it together. So let's say, you know, a trauma or something happened when you were 5, and you took it a certain way, you wrote a response in your mind to that. Yeah. And then you forgot about it. But then when something happens in your present life when you're an adult, that reminds your inner mind, the subconscious, unconscious mind, of that event, you start feeling the same feelings or acting the same way or thinking the same way. It's kind of inappropriate to who you are now, but everybody does that. Yeah.
So how did you get into this work? So your first training was, I said hypnotist, hypnotherapist. That's different, right? Hypnotherapist is different than a hypnotist.
Well, it uses hypnosis for in a certain way to help solve a problem. So a clinical hypnotherapist, I use that too. That's a slightly different process than, let's say, a regression therapist. But it's both a hypnotherapy process because it works with the inner mind. It bypasses the conscious mind.
So how did you get into that?
Well, you know, I actually got into, the first thing I actually ever studied was energy healing, which was actually something different. But I got into hypnotherapy because I found that people were blocking my ability to give them healing energy because they had emotional blocks, and they didn't have a good way to help them with the emotional blocks. And so that's when I studied the regression therapy, and once people kind of worked out that problem inside of them, then it was very easy for them to take in the healing energy. So that's kind of what got me there. But I got really fascinated with the hypnotherapy part, so that became kind of my main modality. So
you said energy healing work. Was that like Reiki or something like that?
Well, it's not Reiki, but it's like Reiki.
Okay.
Right. I studied with Barbara Brennan. She had a 4-year healing course, and it's working with the energy field, which is the electromagnetic field around the physical body. So.
Okay, so it sounds like these things just kind of evolved. So you started with the energy work, then you went into the hypnotherapy work, then the TAT.
Right.
You just kind of folded that in?
I did. Well, I'm always learning. I love to learn new things, and so I'm always looking for processes that are going to help my clients get results faster or more permanently, or, you know, or not everything works with everybody.
Yeah, right.
So I like to have different tools. But it was in the hypnotherapy school where I met my teacher when I did the advanced course, and she was very much a spiritual person. So she kind of, and I was a spiritual person coming from the background I did, but she kind of started pointing me to other schools and things that I could study to develop my spirituality.
So when you say a spiritual person, what do you mean by that? Because I'm thinking everybody's spiritual.
Well, they are. They are. You're right. Everybody is spiritual. Well, I think it's I think we have many parts of ourselves. And the conscious mind and the way we live in the world is just one small little part. But we have a lot of more wisdom than that. We have, I call it the vertical self. We have different aspects of ourselves, but we're not aware of them.
So vertical meaning different layers or levels of consciousness, being consciously aware.
Yes, correct.
Okay.
So, so I've spent a lot of time studying, developing processes, learning processes that help awaken your awareness of those other parts. Those other parts have a lot of wisdom, and they look at the world a little differently. So if you were coming from those other parts, you would make other choices than you would if you were just coming from your normal daily living part.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So interesting. So you also call yourself a death and dying specialist.
Right.
So like,
How does that happen?
I mean, is that like being a hospice worker, or no, there's other training for that? Because you're
Well, I am a hospice volunteer, actually. But when I started studying spirituality from my hypnotherapy school, I began to learn a lot about what happens after you die, where you go, what that process is, why you would reincarnate again, what your soul's purpose is, and I began to learn a lot about that.
So how did you learn that? Because yeah, I mean, because
well,
you said you
there's a
learned
school.
kind of
I went to a school.
Yeah.
Down in Georgia called Delphi University, and that's where I got my title, Metaphysician Practitioner, my certification.
Okay.
And they began to teach different ideas about spirituality, where you come from. These are ideas that go back thousands and thousands of years. The mystics, whether it was in Delphi in Greece, whether it was in India, you know, whether it was the Essenes in the Mideast, they all studied different aspects of who you are. And they had spiritual schools. They called them mystery schools, actually.
Yeah.
And so this school began to talk about some of those things and had processes so you could begin to experience it. So I think it's really important to experience something. So any process I do with somebody is experience-based. So I could talk about this for hours and hours and hours, but that doesn't necessarily give you any knowledge or wisdom.
Right. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But if you had an aha and experience yourself, then it's like, oh, that's what that means.
Right.
So I'm really into giving you an experience. And when I studied in hypnotherapy, I came across this guy, Dr. Michael Newton, and he developed a process, a hypnotherapy process, to take you to the memory of where you go when you die. And it's called Life Between Lives.
So a memory, so meaning that really means you remember before you were born here.
That's right. So the way we do
life.
That's this life. That's correct. So the way we do the process is we actually take you into a past life rapidly, you know, not for a long time there, and then we follow what happens after you died in that past life. Where'd you go? What was your experience?
So what would you say to people who don't believe in this?
I don't know. It's okay not to believe in it. If I were to do a healing process with you, even a past life regression, it's irrelevant whether you believe in it or not. If you just want to think of it as a metaphor for your mind, you'll still get the healing response. Right? That's what I'm looking for. But if you're studying spirituality and you want to study that with me, we're presupposing that you at least have an open mind about that. Otherwise, why would you want to study it?
Right,
if you think everything is just from the day you were born to the day you die, then we don't have a lot to talk about spiritually.
Right.
Right? So I got into the death and dying thing because I learned a lot about that. And I studied with Dr. Newton, and we went through those processes. I went through other processes and recovered memories and had experiences. So if somebody's has a loved one that's passing on, then I would like to help the loved one kind of understand what's going to happen, prepare them so they have a smoother experience, help the people that are left behind to create a closure, so when the person passes on, you don't feel like you have any unleft business, you don't regret anything, you're not carrying around any resentments. Those things are really important for, you know, a smooth moving on. It doesn't mean you're not going to be sad, because most people are not psychic enough to be able to talk to the person that passed on. But I will say, when I go to funerals, it's the person who passed on keeps talking to me.
You have those experiences?
All the time, but because I'm the only one who's listening. And they're trying to tell me I'm okay, tell them I'm okay, and what have you. You know, so I have those experiences. But as a hospice volunteer, I try to create those experiences for people.
So just by counseling them and
at whatever their level is. You know, I don't want to mess with my beliefs versus their beliefs. So we look at where their beliefs are, but just psychologically to make a closure. Like the person who's passing on, I might ask them, well, is there anybody that you have any regrets about? You want to apologize about something? Well, let's do that now. Let's imagine they're here. Let's write a letter to them. That's important for them when they move on. My belief of where you go when you move on, you don't want anything here to pull you here. You want to make a smooth passage to this other side.
So do you work with the prayer Ho'oponopono? I
don't. I know of it.
Yeah, I mean, well, that prayer was given to me when my father was in the process of dying. I've worked with it. It's a very powerful prayer for forgiveness. So forgiveness is really important. And when I do even just healing process, like the TAT process has a whole section on forgiveness, right? I'm looking for that, because if you can't forgive something, then you're holding on to it, right? It's like you're punching yourself in the face. It holds you back. When you forgive, there's a lot of confusion about forgiveness. You know, forgiveness, I think, is one of the hardest things in the world. Personally,
so here's
I think it's very difficult to really, truly, you know,
here's
forgive
my
someone.
metaphor that I give people that helps them understand forgiveness. So if you were, forgiveness is not condoning something that was inappropriate or hurtful. So if I say I forgive you, doesn't mean I think that was okay. All right? Forgiveness is not making believe that it didn't happen. Oh, I forgave you, it wasn't really that bad. No, it's not that either. Forgiveness is saying, you know what, I'm moving on. So I might not even know why you did, whatever you did, but I'm not holding on to it. So for instance, if you were angry at somebody, to me that's like picking up a hot coal and throwing it at them. Now maybe you hit them, maybe you won't. But every time you pick up the hot coal, you burn your hand. So forgiveness is saying, I'm not willing to burn my hand anymore. I'm moving on. Well, anger is toxic. It gets in your blood, and that's right. That's right. But that would be true of, so anything where you're not willing to forgive someone, that's energy being blocked inside of you. Well, believe me, I've done a lot of my own work around forgiveness and talked to a lot of people about it. But the thing is that everything you're saying makes logical sense. But sometimes it can be difficult to actually work through the emotions of it and let go. So in other words, if somebody was listening to this show right now, what if they were having difficulty emotionally letting go? Not because everything you're saying, like logically, intellectually, that makes sense. But if they just couldn't let it go, what advice would you give them? Well, I would say that one of the things that I think is very destructive in our society is blame. So we blame somebody for how we feel. I don't think anybody's responsible for how you feel. That doesn't mean I don't think people do inappropriate things, but you choose the response. They didn't make you feel that way. So the minute you blame somebody for that, you give your power away. You can't heal it. So I'm for being responsible for how you feel, and then do some kind of a process. Go get some help. Go work with somebody, whether it's a therapist, hypnotherapist, an energy worker, a Reiki person, whatever it is, get some help to help you get unblocked about what's going on.
So are you saying that the only way to really get unblocked is to work with somebody else? There's nothing you can do on your own?
Well, no, there are things you can do on your own. I would say a good question to ask when you get upset is, what does that remind me of? What does that bring me back to that's not involved in this situation? Because I think that things that happen in your present day are triggers for something else that's unresolved. But you can just simply ask the question, what does that bring me back to?
Yeah.
And then maybe you can begin to understand that.
So that's a very, so I was originally trained as an expressive arts therapist, so I have a clinical background. And I was trained through a psychodynamic, that's a very psychodynamic approach.
Yes.
You know, I mean, that's really what it is saying, okay, what's the origin, back, a lot of times back in my childhood or whatever, what's the origin of it? I also study the Kabbalah, which is kind of similar in terms of seeds for, you know, the karma that you're trying to work through. So, so it sounds like a lot of it is, what you're recommending is the thought process of reflecting on and seeing what the origins of, and then just working with yourself to let it go.
That's one way to do it. Also, I think it's really important that you ask the right question when you have a problem. So let's say you have a really difficult situation in your life. So you could bitch and moan about it, you can be upset about it, you can blame somebody for it. None of that helps your situation. I think a more intelligent question to ask is, okay, here I am, how can I grow from this situation? What can I learn from it? And
so that's very, I'm just being devil's advocate here, okay? Because that's very rational approach. And if somebody's really triggered by something that's very emotional, you know, just in terms of the neuroscience of it, their prefrontal cortex is like cut off, so they're not going to be in their rational brain. So sometimes they may need to just vent, even if it's just go punch a punching bag or something.
And that's great, you can do that.
So it's like, okay, let that out. You know, being the experience of the emotion, and then you can sit down, then hopefully you'll get beyond that, so then you can think clearly, because really a lot of times if you're really angry about something, you can't see clearly.
So so if I'm working with someone, let's say we did a regression, I encourage them to feel the feeling. I encourage them to let's look at where it started and express and feel the feeling so you get a good idea about it. And I have a releasing process, which is a certain holotropic breathing method to release the energy of it.
So to work through it that way. So let me ask you this. So Metaphysician Practitioner. So for our audience who's not familiar with that at all, can you explain what that is?
Well, metaphysics is really looking at what normal people, what we would call it, is invisible. Stuff we don't notice or we don't see, but it's still going on. Just like we can't see infrared light, but it's still there. So the metaphysics is dealing with these places that our conscious mind doesn't normally grasp or understand, or our awareness is too narrow. So it's about expanding your awareness so you can begin to see a bigger picture and experience a bigger picture. So metaphysics is studying that, is studying those broader, more expanded experiences. Right? And you can train yourself to have that experience. There's nothing special about me that you couldn't do or anybody listening to this show couldn't do if you just focus in the correct way and you practice the things.
So what would be an example of so what would be an example of a tool or processes that you would recommend for somebody who is trying to expand their awareness?
Meditation, hands down, is the best process.
So I teach Kundalini yoga and meditation. So I do meditation, I do some silent meditation, some chanting meditation. So is there particular kinds of meditation that you personally have found that are effective?
When I work with people, I find the best type of meditation for people to start with is a guided meditation. So it's very difficult. Some of the mindfulness or the Buddhist meditations, and they're great, I have nothing wrong with them, but it's very difficult for someone just starting out to sit there and just put you in a place of beingness and watch your breath go in and out. It's almost impossible for people to do that. But if you give them a guided meditation, you're giving them a focus, and then you kind of guide them into an altered state. From that altered state, you can be in a place of silence. It's a different experience. So I like guided meditations as a good way to get there.
So even this, sometimes when I'm having people focus on slow, deep breathing, right. I will talk them through it, like in, 2, 3, 4,
Okay.
you know, I'd count for them so they're, you know, following that. But I know what you mean. I mean, I personally, it took me 4 teacher trainings, yoga teacher trainings. I'm training a lot of, to get consistent with my practice. And still, it's a practice. It's not easy.
That's right.
And especially in the day that we live in, where there's so many distractions, and even just the technology affects our electromagnetic fields.
Sure.
So what would you say about that?
Well, I think that life is a matter of identity and focus. So if you begin to focus on meditations, or at least the ones that I teach and do, you begin to have an experience inside that's really pleasurable and really interesting. That becomes more and more interesting, and so you want to sit and meditate and do that because it's really interesting and feels good, more interesting than some of the other things you're doing. So you make a priority to make sure you're doing that because it's creating a certain response. So I wouldn't think of missing my meditation in the morning because to me that changes my whole day.
Yeah. So you meditate every day?
Every day.
How long do you meditate for?
Well, this is not a good for people who are starting out, but I meditate for an hour to an hour and a quarter in the mornings. And on the weekends, I might meditate an hour and a half or 2 hours because I have more time. You know, but I'm doing different things I've learned, different places I'm visiting in my mind, different experiences I'm having, but it's the most blissful, amazing experience. I mean, nothing beats that. I mean, nothing beats it.
So when you call yourself a metaphysician, I can't say that word, practitioner, you're saying basically I'm a practitioner of expanding my conscious awareness.
And expanding your conscious awareness.
You're working with people to do that.
That's right.
Yeah. And so one-on-one in groups or both?
Both. Yeah. So I have groups. I have meditation classes. I have workshops I teach to give people different experiences, and then I work with people one-on-one to give them an experience. Like one of the things I think is really, really important and falls in with this metaphysics or spirituality is to get guidance from what I call the higher realms or the higher self, right? Because if you have a problem in life, if you have a source that you can go to and ask a question and get a really interesting answer about how to approach something, that's so valuable. So
how do you define spirituality or the spiritual realms?
Well, again, it's those other realms that are more expanded than the conscious mind. I mean, they're in spiritual circles. They're given names, you know, but that's not going to mean anything to your audience. But you know, you have an astral plane, you have a mental plane, you have a Buddhic plane. But these are just words for different levels of experience. But for instance, everybody's probably had a feeling of intuition at some time in their life, right? Yeah. Well, that to me is a spiritual experience. That's not coming from your conscious mind. All of a sudden you
just have a sense.
A sense. Or maybe you got a knowingness. You got some information that just kind of downloaded in your mind without you figuring it out or thinking about it. To me, that's a spiritual experience, right? You can cultivate that so you can get that more and more, so that you can read that, you know when you're getting that information. And I think that's really valuable. And I teach people how to do that because it's been so valuable for me. I mean, I could go, when I'm meditating, I'd call it a seed meditation. I'll write out a question. I'll do a meditation process. I'll ask that question in my meditation. I'll hear an answer, you know, or part of an answer. And at the end of the meditation, I'll open my eyes, I'll read the question again, and I'll start writing whatever comes to me. I could get a page of information. Then I'll look at that the next day and I'll say, wow, look at that. I'm looking at a situation that was bothering me, maybe an emotional situation. You know, and it's giving me a whole different perspective, because your higher self or your soul or whatever word you want to call that it's looking at the world in a very different way. It's not just looking at this world, this lifetime. It's looking at a bigger picture.
So in a way, I mean, the way you're describing it, just very practical terms, is just creating space where you can kind of step back and get a different perspective about how you're viewing a person or a situation.
And a different part of you helping you with that perspective.
Yeah.
Or let's say here, here we are, we're in the room together, we can ask each other a question. Well, who's to say that on these spiritual realms there aren't some people over there that can give you some answers? I think there are. And I can help you find them. And ask questions of those beings, those people that live in those other realms. I think they're living there right now. And I think you're living there right now also. But you're just not aware of it. But you could become aware of it.
Yeah, yeah. So, so what, can you give our audience like just a quick example of a situation where somebody came to you and what they experienced? Like a process you took them through and what they experienced?
Are you looking for like a spiritual process or a healing process?
A healing, let's just say a healing process.
Okay, so let's say someone comes to me and they get emotionally upset. Someone, their brother-in-law annoys them all the time. And they say whatever and it annoys them. So we could say, okay, let's do a relaxation process. Get them on, have a massage table, and we'll do a little relaxation process, get them into an altered state.
So you'll guide them through something.
I'll guide them through something, meditation. Kind of a relaxation. And then I'll say, okay, well, go back to the recent time your brother-in-law really bothered you. You felt bothered by it. Actually, the brother-in-law didn't bother you. You felt bothered by it. And I said, let's look at that a little more. I'll ask a few questions. What other emotions, what's there? Okay, feel that. Now I'll do a little countdown from 10 to 1. And I'll ask their mind, show you another time where you felt the same or similar feeling, an earlier time. And whatever comes to them, and then we'll work with it to see how they put that together. And we'll look at the negative effects that's having in your life, and are you interested in releasing that? And if they are, then we'll do this releasing process. And then usually every time someone has a misimpression, there's always faulty thoughts that go along with it.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
So we'll enunciate what the faulty thoughts are. Then at the end they'll say, okay, well, what new ideas would you like for your life?
Okay, and then you take it from there.
And they'll create something new, and then we'll give them some homework. To say those new things to themselves. So
this has been very thought-provoking, hopefully for our audience. If somebody had any questions about anything you covered tonight, how would they contact you?
Well, they could email me. And my email address is my name, Michael R. at alternativechoices, which is the name of my company, .org. So if they email me at michael.r@alternativechoices.org, not .com, then I will respond.
Okay. All right. Thanks for coming on the show.
All right.
I'm Susan Shaner. Until next time, thank you for joining us.